시청자 여러분 안녕하십니까? JNCTV 정찬임 앵커입니다. 100여 년 전 우리 조상들은 일제 탄압 속에서 3.1 만세운동을 선언하며 독립을 향한 열망을 표현했습니다. 이러한 독립운동이 대한민국의 광복을 이룰 수 있게 했습니다. 오늘은 3.1제를 기념하며 로스앤젤레스에 거주하고 있는 도산 안창호 선생님의 외손자이신 필립 안 커디님을 모시고 도산 안창호 선생님의 업적에 대해서 자세히 알아보겠습니다. Hi, Philip.
안녕하십니까?
안녕하세요.
한국말 조금 해요. 영어로 해요.
네, nice to meet you.
네.
네, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, we appreciate you for publishing the last interview on the website to commemorate Tosan. Today, we want to know more about the Tosan's achievements. Number one, actually, the ChatGPT has become a popular topic of discussion. Here are explanation of Tosan's 4 principles generated by ChatGPT. Dosan An Chang-ho developed 4 principal ideals that he believed were essential for building strong individuals and a strong society. These ideas are 무실, 역행, 충의, and 용감. 무실 means seeking and speaking the truth. Dosan believed that the truthfulness is the foundation of all good relationships, and that only by facing and acknowledging the truth can one truly grow and improve. 역행 means putting truth into action. Dosan believed that knowing the truth is not sufficient, and one must take action to bring about the positive change in the world. 충의 means being loyal to one's principles and values. Dosan believed that the true loyalty comes from staying true to one's principles rather than blindly following others. And 용감 means having the courage to take risks and overcome challenges. Dosan believed that the true bravery comes from standing up for what is right, even in the face of opposition. This is generated by the ChatGPT.
They did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
I was surprised.
Yeah, me too. I was surprised. We are using the latest AI for our interview today. Could you give some examples to understand Tosan's 4 principles better than this?
Teaching Tosan's philosophy and then, living as Tosan's grandson, all these principles and values mean a lot to me. And I think, a lot of people, especially in Korea, always think of Tosan as so far in the past. Mm-hmm. I think when you talk about the 4 principles, why did Tosan concentrate on the truth so much? So when he was young in 1894, there was the war between China and Japan in Korea, and a lot of bad things happened in Pyongyang. So if you look at Ukraine today, what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians, invading their country, is the same thing as the Japanese did to the Koreans. So if you watch the news and you see a lot of people lying and politicians, soldiers, Russians, they're making up stories. If they do an interview, they say that Ukraine invaded Russia. So it's not the truth. So when Tosan was a young man, he went to Seoul to find out what was going on. And when he got there, he found out there was a lot of corruption in the monarchy. There was business people selling their land. He was there when Queen Min was assassinated by the underground Japanese, basically terrorists. And so all of a sudden, he realized that all of these problems were based on people not telling the truth. So that became his pursuit. So I think if people think Tosan doesn't matter today, Tosan really matters today, because everything he's speaking about pertains to life. I know it's March 1st, just passed, and the speech by President Yoon was a mistake, and when Korean young people are living in Hell Chosun, they don't trust anybody. And so you start to see where the trust, seeking the truth, acting on the truth, having courage to speak up is needed today. So I think, does that make sense? Does it start to, become more modern? And for me, my own life as an example of the four principles can be seen at Harvard University, where recently Professor Ramsayer had made so many false claims about the comfort women's situation. And Harvard supported that. So for me, I had to be brave. I had to have the courage, because my principles were conflicting with what Ramsayer said. And when I confronted the school, they backed Ramsayer. They said what he could say was academic freedom of speech. I don't like that, because it's not the truth, and what happened was, the reason they kind of listened to me is because I was going to donate Tosan's things and my mother's things to the library and the museum. But when I heard that and confronted the school to find out, the university, Harvard University, what was really going on, I just said, there's no way. I am not going to have them have Tosan's things and then not tell the truth about the Japanese sex slaves and the comfort women issue. So it was important, and it was a big thing at the school, and a lot of the young people were angry. And then I had a lot of interviews at that time with the Korean press from Korea. But what else I had studied before, here's a book. I don't know if you can see it. It's the Foreign Destruction of Korean Independence. And it was written by Carol Cameron Shaw. And in that book, there was a lot of information about what the Americans did to undermine Korean independence. And as I studied the book, it's a very good book. It was criticized by Korean journalists because it was really incriminating evidence about what happened during the beginning of the independence movement. So as I studied it, I realized that one of the main characters, Edward Vernon Morgan, graduated from Harvard in 1890. And I remember reading Arthur Leslie Gardner's dissertation on Tosan, and he mentioned the name, it was Magata Tenatero, who I also looked up was a graduate of Harvard from 1874. And so all of a sudden there was this trail of Harvard's involvement with overthrowing the Korean government. And another person, let's see, his name is Matsukata Masayoshi, was a prime minister. And he came to the United States seeking money. And his son was a student at Harvard in 1902. Mm-hmm. So everywhere you look, there's this connection to Harvard. And what Harvard did was also connect them with money people like the Carnegies, Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan. Mm-hmm. And what ended up happening was the Americans funded the war in 1904 and 1905 against Russia in Japan. So, there's no denying it. So, so I had to really study hard. I felt what was the truth, but to make these accusations, I had to seek the truth. Tosan knew that people would tell people something and they would think it was the truth, but there was so much deception in the independence movement and with the Chinopa and foreign people that to really know what you were going to do, you had to seek the truth. That means you had to study harder. So for the Yokhang, the action that I took was to attack Harvard. The loyalty I had was my principles and values were conflicting with what Harvard was saying. And so what was interesting about President Yoon's speech on March 1st got a lot of criticism. But the United States State Department praised what he said. And that was wrong. And it was funny because I think his name is Price. His last name is Price.
Mm-hmm.
He's the spokesperson for the State Department. And also Anthony Blinken is the head of the State Department. They both went to Harvard. And Obama in 2015, in the meeting with Park Geun-hye and Abe, another Harvard person who is also pro-Japanese, Biden is pro-Japanese, they crammed the deal down Park Geun-hye's throat. And so, the more I studied, it just seems that it's odd that Harvard would have such a long tradition of being pro-Japanese. And of course, everything that I went through with the Ramsayer situation, which is even worse now, because the International Review of Law and Economics, which is not a very good publication to begin with, but still they published his paper. So when I was criticizing Harvard and I took back, the offer for the donation, I forget her name, but she was a Korean professor who was the head of the Korean Studies Department, called me, emailed me, said, "Are you sure you don't want to donate?" And I kind of thought about it, but then I went, no, I'm going to stick to my values. I'm going to do what I think is right. I'm going to do what I think is the truth. So sure enough, just a couple of weeks ago, they published this article. So had I donated the stuff to them and then they published this article, it would have been a mistake on my part, a huge mistake. And now what since they published the article, Ramsayer is saying that the whole Comfort Women matter is a hoax. And that's one of the worst things that anybody could say about the Comfort Women situation. And just recently, a professor, I think his name is Ha Jong-moon from Hanshin University,
Mm-hmm.
just published a book after 15 years of researching Japanese soldiers' diaries during the occupation. I always use occupation. People say annexation. Korea was occupied because it wasn't legal. And that's exactly what's happening in Ukraine. They're saying they're going to annex. There's no agreement. So that's what all this truth about history is. You really look deep. And so, Tosan's ideas are really relevant today. And there's such a need in Korea for his kind of philosophy, his spirit, his honesty, and his leadership. That was a long answer to one question.
Oh yeah, okay. Actually, I was going to ask about your canceling of the historical materials, but you already talked about it. So could you elaborate on this issue and provide some background information about the Harvard Chinilpa Corporator?
For people that are really interested in it, on my website at www.dosan.org,
Mm-hmm.
there's a section where it's called, Harvard Collaborators. And so they don't want to hear it. They don't communicate with me anymore, but there's so much evidence. I mean, how can you argue with their alumni? Edward Vernon Morgan graduated in 1890, the Japanese Tenatero, 1874. It's unfortunate, but what the other thing that happened is Edward Vernon Morgan and the I always forget it, Matsukata.
Mm-hmm.
They took, there was these fake nickels that were part of the Korean finance system. And so Korea had a bank. The Bank of Korea was handling the monarchy's finances. So these people, Harvard alumni, very intelligent and pro-Japanese, did something with these fake nickels that made the Korean economy collapse.
Oh,
And it's interesting because in this book, I don't know if you can see it, A New History of Korea, which is an old book by Iggy Beck. It's edited by Edward Wagner, who was a professor at Harvard, and it talks about the fake nickels. And then as I researched more to make sure my accusation was historically correct, there's a lot of information on it. And that's how the Daiichi Bank took over the finances of Korea. So, you know, it's really not just people talking, it's people actually doing things involved with the destruction of Korean independence.
okay. Maybe this is the annual job. So what plans do you have to commemorate the Tosan this year, 2023?
2023, you know, November, it will be 50 years since I went to Korea for the first time for the opening of Tosan Park. And I don't know, have you ever seen a picture of me with Park Chung-hee?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, my hair was long and he hated it, you know, so that's one of the things I want to go back to Korea for that. But actually, there's a story that's come out of Riverside, California called Pachapa Camp. And they're saying that Professor Edward Chong is claiming that Pachapa is the first Koreatown. And there's some other things, but right now, my most important help for Tosan is to try to get the truth out. The book is the worst book on Korean history I've ever seen. It's this one right here. It's this Pachapa Camp. There is so much in there that is not true. You know, and that's one of the things, you know, he uses Tosan all the time, but he doesn't use Tosan's 4 principles of the truth. On every other page, there's a mistake, there's a false claim. You know, like he says, my Uncle Philip was born in Riverside. My Uncle Filson was born in Riverside in 1912. Philippon was born in Los Angeles in 1905. He says that the On family lived in Riverside from 1904 to 1918. Tosan left to go back to Korea in 1907 to start the Shinminhae. He didn't come back till 1911. My grandmother moved from Riverside to Redlands to Danuba. I mean, I could go on, you know, so there's 5 of us doing a panel. John Cha, who wrote my mom's book, Willow Tree Shade, is one of them, and a PhD student from Korea. So our goal is to take this book and expose the problems with it. That's my most important thing right now, because what happened is Professor Edward Chong, with his false claims, convinced the Mellon Foundation in New York to give him $850,000 to take a photo exhibit around the United States. That's a fake photo exhibit. Most of those photos are mine. I did the first photo exhibit in Riverside, I think it was in 1999 or 2000. And, you know, so, you know, a lot of people didn't like what Tosan had to say. I mean, you know, not everybody agreed with him. And so I'm convinced that I'm telling the truth. I'm convinced that I've sought, you know, I seek the truth and I found it. And so, you know, I'm living Tosan's 4 principles to try to deal with Harvard, to try to deal with UC Riverside. And so for me, it's not that bad because Tosan went to jail 6 times. And, you know, I'm just here at my house studying Tosan's things. So, you know, it's not as bad as it sounds, but I don't know why the South Korean government supports these people here. And what was really interesting was the main person in Riverside who became president of the Dosan Memorial Foundation was Chin Il-pa. His name is Hong Myung-gi, and his father was Hong Chan. And Hong Chan was a filmmaker and worked with Syngman Rhee as well. But I think Military Train was a movie he made in 1937.
Mm-hmm.
So while Tosan's in jail in Sodaemun prison, Hong Myung-gi, the son of Hong Chan is making pro-Japanese films. So, again, where's the Mushil? Where's the Yokeng? Where's the Chungli? Where's the Yeongnam? So I don't think people really understand. I think they think of like the kids when I talk to kids from Korea, like I used to have a group from Namseol Daehak that would visit here every year. They would say Tosan is one page in a history book, one question on a test, and most of us forget about it. But when they find out more to the story and how much he was supportive of the youth, then they change their mind. So that's I'm doing a lot.
Okay, so Riverside area is a specific area to your family, right?
It's historical. The family was there, but they say it's the Mecca. Do you know what Mecca means? Mecca means the spiritual center, the most important place, like for Muslims. Riverside was a ghetto.
Oh, Mecca.
Mecca, yeah. Riverside was not the center of the independence movement. They say that Riverside is where the provisional government started, and so my uncle was born in Riverside. The family worked there because there was orange picking jobs. But in Redlands, which is near there was a Korean mission in 1906.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Korean mission in downtown LA in 1904. So, the other thing in Tosan's philosophy is provinciality or regionalism. Like Tosan didn't start the Hungsadan until there was 8 representatives of every province. To say that Riverside is the most important, to say that it's the Mecca, totally defies Tosan's principles about that. Mm-hmm. Because it was all Koreans here working together. Now, Koreans in America are divided. Koreans in Korea are divided. At the pioneer generation during the independence movement, everybody worked together to fight the Japanese to save Korea. So it was a completely different kind of a person. So Riverside, is history, but Riverside is not the history that Professor Ed Chong and other people in Riverside, the city of Riverside is really involved in this. I mean, it's like I'm attacking Harvard on the East Coast and attacking Riverside on the West Coast. So I have a big battle going on.
Okay, the Korean word "친일파" is pretty the exact pronunciation. Actually, this is a kind of begging your advice more than the questions. Do you have any advice for the young generation in Korea on how to create a brighter future for their country?
Well, I think studying Tosan's 4 principles and studying more about Tosan is one, and demanding that the politicians and their leaders study Tosan as well. When you look at the National Assembly, I think a lot of those people are from Chinopa families. And, so what's interesting, I work in Korea with the surfing industry. There's a wave park in Sihung and O'Neill Wetsuit Company. I was just in Korea right before in 2021, before the pandemic. And mm-hmm. I'm in touch with young Korean surfers and Korean people all the time. And when they've learned more about Tosan, I think, they understand that is something that could help their future. So as far as that kind of study of history, Tosan was the most formidable threat against the Japanese in the entire independence movement. Tosan was a person who loved Korea more than anybody, and he sacrificed himself for that. And I think when you look at his history, and also, people don't understand that Tosan criticized the kingdom. In 1898, he gave a speech against the monarchy about the corruption and the bad taxes. He switched to the Japanese. So, it's unfortunate that freedom of speech is not as open-hearted as it is here, but it's tough. But if you really know the truth, you really study and seek the truth, then you should, be like Tosan, study like Tosan, love Korea like Tosan. The other thing, as far as just for kids or young people or even older people, that learn how to surf or learn how to swim. A lot of Koreans don't swim, but you can play tennis, you can go hiking. That's easy because you're walking on land. But if you don't know how to swim and you go in the ocean or you go in the pool, you're going to drown. You can't survive unless you learn. You can't survive unless you're strong. You can't survive unless you have courage. So we're back to Mushil Yokeng Chung. So, and as I've noticed too, with the Korean surfers and the people at the beach, they're concerned for the environment, for the land. They're cleaning up much better than they ever did before. So, I study Hel Chosun. I'm very sad because, Tosan was all about the youth. His one of his sayings is discouragement of the youth is the death of the nation. And, so my advice, would be, study Tosan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree to you. Yeah, Tosan's principles can go through in any times, in any place, in any world. Yeah. And the last one, I have a favor to ask.
Okay.
Could you please raise your hands? And what am I saying?
Manse!
Manse!
Manse! Manse!
Manse! Because it's just 3일절.
Yeah, no, it's important. I think that's one of the most important days in Korean history. It's something that should always be spoke of correctly as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But thank you for the interview. I'm very honored that I had the time, and hopefully the Koreans understand what I said.
Oh, I have to say that thank you for the interview today.
Sure.
Anyway, let us continue to do our duty as descendants of Tosan, and let's keep doing that.
Please, 합시다.
네, 합시다. Thank you.
네, 전만해요.
네,
안녕히 계세요.
네, 감사합니다.
네.
네. 오늘은 도산 안창호 선생님의 외손자 필립 안 커디님을 모시고 도산 안창호 선생님의 업적을 듣는 시간을 가져봤습니다. 우리가 이런 독립운동을 잊지 않고 계속 이어가고 또 독립운동가의 후손들에게 더 많은 관심을 가질 때 우리 대한민국의 미래는 더 밝아질 것입니다.
더 나은 세상을 위해 공정한 언론의 역할을 다하고자 노력하는 JSTV는 전 제작진의 자발적인 참여로 만들어지는 독립 언론이자 대한 매체입니다. 방송이 마음에 드셨다면 응원의 표시로 지금 좋아요, 구독 버튼을 눌러주세요. 감사합니다.